great to be here today, and as I say, thank you for the introduction, and also to my colleagues around the table who I hope we will have a stimulating discussion. This is not a webinar, so I'm not going to do a really formal presentation. I'm going to put some slides up because I'm very, very weak at being able to visualize things without something to look at. That's my background. FDF, finished dose form, is probably the one thing which in our world is taken for granted. Our customers, the patients, really don't have any understanding of what goes into the finished dose form. They take it for granted. They expect it to be effective. They expect it to be safe. They forget that the industry spends 10 years plus in bringing this finished dose formulation to market. They try and ensure that it's absorbed. If it's not absorbed, is there another way in which it can be delivered? Through patches, through inhalers, through dissolvable tablets, any other way. The industry spends a lot of money not just on research but development. But of course all these skills are not always contained within one company. Outsourcing has become the buzzword in the last 15 years. But outsourcing is essential now for two reasons. One, economy. Two is to have the best knowledge and the best available technology to deliver a finished dose formulation. And of course, to make sure that from the patient's perspective, the product actually meets all of the requirements of an effective clinical therapy. So what I'm going to just talk about the challenge really of where we are today. We have had some significant clinical advances, but at the same time, we haven't had the growth in the economy to actually allow us to move forward with confidence in terms of healthcare budgets. One of my older slides was always talking about how much does the pharmaceutical expenditure represent as total healthcare costs, and it always used to be around about 20%. I haven't done that evaluation for a long period of time, and we get a lot of press about the cost of drugs and the increasing cost of pharmaceuticals, but I'm assuming probably the other healthcare costs have grown at the same time and probably faster. So maybe that ratio hasn't changed, but I think it's something I'll have a look at when I get back again. But today I want to feature on the major growth markets for the finished dose formulations and the opportunities for in and out licensing. So let's look at the total global market for a moment. Now these are IMS figures which are financially based. They do not represent discounts and rebates, so these values are all at the ex-manufacturer prices. So they're overstated to many degrees. But in terms of the healthcare payer, quite often this is the amount of money that the healthcare payer will pay. The rest of the money is in discounts and rebates, which may not benefit the end payer. So when you look at this, and I always use this figure as an astounding figure, by 2020, the global market is going to be worth $1.4 trillion. Now in my humble life, I cannot really imagine what $1.4 trillion looks like. But of course, this is good news for the pharma industry because it's a healthy industry, growing, as I say here, at 4 to 7% compound annual growth rate. But from the industry's point of view, regional, globally, the markets are very different. We've looked to the past with pharmerging markets, as we call them in IMS, where we've had more than double-digit growth for several years. What we're seeing now is a slowdown in this growth in emerging markets, mainly because of economic factors, and also a pickup in the developed market growth. Now, the developed market growth is interesting because this reflects two things. One, the innovation that has come through to the market, the new blockbuster drugs that we're seeing. The day of the blockbuster we thought was over, but the day of the blockbuster has come back again, and we're seeing some significant clinical advances, which of course hit the market at premium prices. And we all know the press over the last year or so has been really focused on the prices of medicines, not only in Europe, but also, of course, specifically in the USA. But when you're a pharmaceutical company, what you're looking at is where can I get the best return? Where is the best demand for my medicine going to be met? And where's my medicine, of course, going to be most effective? So what we can see here is a decline in the growth in the pharmerging markets, but a resurgence of growth in the developed markets, and in particular in the USA. So looking at that, what's driving this growth? Well, again, the press has told us much about biologics, and some of the most significant clinical advances have been in the area of biological therapy, autoimmune diseases and cancers in particular. But what I show here is that when you look at the growth in specialty medicines here, we've got from 2010, 77% and now 70% in 2015. So you can see the growth in specialty medicines. If you look at biologic versus small molecules, then on the right-hand side there, you've still got a significant growth in biologics, but the foundation of therapy still really remains in the small molecules. So from the generics industry and from those without biologic capabilities, there are still significant opportunities. And indeed, the recent most successful launches mostly were specialist and focused on patient populations, specific patient populations, but not all were biologics. And so we've had some significant blockbusters in the small chemical molecule area. But all of these products were launched into those areas where there was a high clinical need. So the research drive behind the industry is to meet unmet clinical needs. And we have to be honest that there's certain therapeutic areas where we have achieved most of our objectives. The treatment of high blood pressure is an example, the gastroenterological indications, a lot of the dermatological conditions. Lots of our significant challenges have been met, but there still remain some key ones that research is focused on. And that focus is diverging. We've seen the specialty drive, and in the USA, for example, there on the right you see that specialty medicines are driving the growth in the USA. However, if you look at the lower part of that, it's the traditional medicines that are driving the growth in the far emerging markets. The need for what we call older molecules, with the increasing in affluence and access to healthcare in some of the far emerging markets, means that the generic medicines that we have in the West are actually now key growth products for the far emerging markets. If you look at growth, well, 75% of the global growth really comes from 5 therapeutic areas. And these are hepatitis, and we've all seen the Sovaldi-Harvoni story. Here you have a blockbuster product which for the first time in history is actually able to offer up to a 98% cure rate. Now, who's to argue about patients who should or who shouldn't get that? And the cost benefit analysis is not just on treating the patients and curing them, but of course removing the ongoing long-term costs of hospitalization and transplants that would have occurred had not the Sovaldi and Harvoni products hit the market. Oncology, we've seen a diversity of products in this area, a lot of biologics, but also some interesting small molecules. Anti-diabetics, some progress there, particularly with some of the insulins. However, still the foundation of therapy there probably still remain in the older generic product, metformin, and its role is still key in the treatment of type 2 diabetes. Anticoagulants, another area which has shown growth, and of course autoimmune, again driven by the biologics, the anti-TNF products in the treatment of rheumatoid arthritis and associated conditions with the immune system. So that's where the focus of research has been, and this is where the growth is coming from. So for the service providers to the industry, technology, skills, understanding of these therapeutic areas is going to be important for the future. And just to show you that it's not all biologics, and this is just some top line things. If you look at oral solid regular release products, of the 200 top molecules, 61% are oral solid regular release. Tablets, capsules. Now, I think a lot of research today in terms of finished dose formulation is to try not to provide a simple tablet or a simple capsule. Is to make the formulation unique, to make it difficult to copy, because the investment nowadays in bringing a new product to market, the generic industry is very capable, very innovative. So as industry to make it as difficult as possible for a product to be copied is one of the challenges facing the research-based industry today. And if you look at slow release, then that's about 15% by value of the top 200 molecules. Injectables, a lot of interest in injectables, a key therapeutic area, but they represent only about 4% by value of the top 200 molecules. And inhalers, although asthma is a key disease here in the UK and treated quite effectively, it's still only about 4% by value of the top 200 molecules. For the generic industry, the good news is, of course, is that now, depending on the market, up to 90% of the volume is off patent. Now, if you step back from that, and work out, therefore, that 9 out of 10 medicines dispensed are effectively generic medicines. That shows you the number of patients who are treated around the world with generic medicines. Now, there are certain obviously variations here, and you can see so opportunities to grow the generic market in some of these countries is still there. But it's a tremendous achievement by the generic industry to meet the need for affordable, effective and safe medicines around the world. And so congratulations to the generic industry for that. And of course, when you look at the emerging markets, they're almost all dependent on generic medicines, based on affordability, but also based on access to healthcare. So I'm not going to spend time looking at the differences here, but there's one subtle difference, is that as we see an increase in out-of-pocket expenditure and affluence increasing in some of these emerging markets, the preference is for a branded generic. That's not to say that there is an issue with generics per se, but in some of these markets, they want to have trust and integrity in the provider of the medicine. So the name of the provider, the manufacturer, is important, and that is why in markets such as the Far East and some of the developing markets, that GSK is considered as a generic producer, because most of their medicines are off patent, but they are considered as branded generics in many of these markets to us as the industry, but locally they are brands. So looking at that, the generic industry is innovative, and portfolio management now is moving away from, shall we call it, vanilla generics. The skills are there, the technology is there. As the market itself moves forward, the generic industry has to move forward. And again, outsourcing, use of CMOs, use of dossier providers. You cannot easily provide a dossier that meets all of the global requirements. You cannot manufacture in a certain part of the world and supply all of the market. So you need to outsource. And what you're seeing with generics companies is now that they're managing their portfolios in different ways. So we're seeing generics which are branded and unbranded, and of course the development of biosimilars. I'll come back to that in just one moment. But every generic company wants to be a specialty company. This terminology of specialty company comes somewhere between R&D and generic. But the ability to enhance and add value to a molecule makes it a specialty, and it makes it something worth having. The challenge to the industry is how do you get a price for these added value products. Then of course vaccines are there, but of course one other one which is now key, particularly in developed markets and in where you have out-of-pocket expenditure, is the development of OTC. And generic OTC products based on affordability and pricing are actually starting to play an important factor in many of these countries. I talked about biosimilars. Well, the move towards biologics, as you can see, the top global 10 products in 2015, 6 of them were actually biologics, leaving only 4 as non-biologics, and we know 2 of those are Harvoni and Sovaldi. So if I took those 2 out, you'd probably find that 8 out of the 10 products would be biologics going forward. So the importance of biologics in clinical usage is vital, and they are. The important thing here is that these products are servicing a much smaller percentage of the population. So what we're doing is spending a lot more money to treat fewer patients. Now this is absolutely the converse of the generic situation, where we are spending a lot less money to treat a lot more patients. So balancing this demand for increased expenditure on specialty biologic medicines, that's going to be important in the future to have a growth in the generics industry, supply of generic medicines to try and bridge that gap. Good news is for the biosimilar developers and also for payers, of course, because the one thing we'll see is that payers love biosimilars, that many key biologics are losing their patent protection by 2020. And in fact, there's $79 billion of global sales at risk in terms of biosimilar entry in the next 7 years. In Europe, I'm not going to spend too much time. The biosimilar story is one which changes every month. But one thing is sure here is that when you look at accessing the market, if you have a tender system, as up here in the Nordics, you get very high penetration, up to 90% market share through tenders. And this is a tender based obviously on the lowest price. There's a lot of other factors in here, interchangeability, substitution, but I'm not going to spend time on that at the moment. But what you can see in the EU5, where we don't have a true country tender system, it's been incremental growth, slow growth, but significant growth. Many factors affecting that as well. And it's also originator pricing strategies and accessing to the originator product as well. But the one thing here is there's an indicator here. If the healthcare system is in a position to influence the use of biosimilars, then you can see the biosimilars taking a far greater percentage of the market than anybody ever really anticipated when biosimilars came to the market 10 years ago. Just to say that, of course, the future is also going to be very much driven by biologics, but those companies in the small chemical molecule area, fear not. In terms of phase 1, phase 2 and phase 3, there are significant small chemical molecules that are going to have a major impact in clinical therapy as well. So there's a good balance, but once again it's going to be the biologics based on price that's going to drive the value market. Also, those of you interested in specific technologies, the growth in the orphan drug market is significant. And as you can see here, 27% of phase 3 registered products are actually going ahead as orphan designated. I talked about OTC briefly, but as David was saying earlier, you know, the communication between patients and consumers is something which the industry's got pretty good at. And the opportunity now to actually take prescription medicines into the community after a period of time, proven safety, proven efficacy, is significant. And of course, just trying to get people to be healthier. I'm a classic example of a failure of that strategy. However, I'm not perhaps representative of the global population. But there is a drive for health. And when you look at the OTC market, line extensions are still probably the most common and proven way to extend a brand's life. And the industry is still focusing on this area. But we all know now that we're in the age of technology, hence today almost, with regard to how we are putting this out. You can see the use of social media, apps, devices, and sensors. All of these things are changing the way in which our patients, our consumers, actually manage not only their lifestyle, but actually manage their health. All of these things give us a global opportunity, but I said right at the start, there's no one company. There isn't really an expert in global pharmaceutical marketing. Every company needs help. And when we look at expansion, geographical expansion, licensing opportunities and partnering are there because you can actually expand without having risky investments. You can partner in terms of geographical expansion. Local companies have access to fast regulatory approvals, fast entry into the market, fast pricing approval. And so using a local company through licensing does speed access and penetration. Some companies require local manufacturing, so of course you need to partner in some way with those countries. Portfolio expansion from in-licensing from small manufacturers have limited resources. Well, I won't call Celltrion a small company, but there was a company who had a product that they wanted to bring into the West, but had no presence in the West, so out-licensed probably their most successful biosimilar at the moment, infliximab, into Western pharma companies. Avoid investments in technology. As I say, as we move to different delivery systems, the capabilities to have these in-house is not there. Quite often is not there. So the use of outsourcing for these technologies is important. And also partnering with therapy experts. If you have a good product and you want to go to market, if you're not in oncology, then trying to be a single product newcomer to the market in oncology is very difficult. Partner with somebody who knows the market or out-license your product in that way. The thing about local players is they have knowledge and access across all functions, which generally means they grow faster in every segment. So in terms of geographical expansion, out-licensing and partnering is key for some of the far emerging markets. So in summary, growth returns to the developed markets, which of course really does raise concerns on access and affordability of healthcare. Growth is mainly from innovative medicines delivering improved clinical results. This growth is tempered though by generic medicines growth increasing, its usage is there and contributing to balancing medicine costs, but also improving access at the same time. Far emerging markets do prefer branded generics, whereas our developed markets favour INN, generically prescribed products. As soon as you put a brand to anything, the cost tends to go up. The perception is that. Biosimilars continue to impact on the biologics market, and it is driven by lower costs and affordability, and that will continue to do so. The one message through all of this, with this growth, this innovation, costs will remain at the top of the agenda of most healthcare providers for the foreseeable future. Thank you.